India slashing the import taxes on gold and silver, bringing the import duties from 15% down to 6%. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics on an eventful week in the markets here. Fortunately, seems like we've slowed down the sell-off in gold and silver over the past couple of days. Certainly, we'll dig into that, as well as some big news that hit the Indian gold and silver markets today, which we will cover in just a moment with today's guest, Steve Cope of Silver Viper Minerals. And Steve, plenty to talk about. I have questions about the mining industry as well. And certainly when you look at the way things are shaping up, again, if there's ever been a market that does not always move in linear fashion to some of the news, that could be gold and silver. Yet when you look at the overall environment of, especially now we have rate cuts coming fast and furious, is the predictions that we're getting for most of the media and banks, and does seem like that will begin in September. So a lot to dig into. And most importantly, how are you doing today before we get started?
Doing well, Chris. It's been an interesting summer so far, and kind of excited to see what we're going to look like here coming into September when it looks like a lot of things are going to really take off.
Yes, it certainly does appear that way. And as we mentioned, it will be interesting to see what the reaction is, because obviously we've just gone through a period where we had higher interest rates, and a pattern that, if you look at rates versus the gold chart, was held pretty closely really until 2022, which again, what happened then? Obviously, we had the invasion of Ukraine, Russia getting kicked out of SWIFT, central banks starting to buy record amounts of gold. So a lot has changed then, although I think that when we do see rate cuts, I certainly am expecting a move in gold and silver. And just to take a quick look at the price as we're recording here on Tuesday afternoon, about 12:30. Steve, we've talked about this before, so maybe not too deep into it today, but just as you think about what's happened once silver has crossed 30, and we've seen range of about $29 to 32, dipping a little bit below that. On one hand, we were always wondering what would happen when we crossed the $30 level, with a lot of technical trading happening there. And perhaps the last thing I will add into that is that here we see a chart of the bank short position in green. So there's short about 44,000 contracts, and you can see as you follow that green line back, still historically short. This is the shortest they've been in the past 3 years. I could take a look farther back, but somewhat of a conundrum where, again, typically this would be the point where we see the price come down, has not happened to a greater degree below that $29 level. Also, the possibility that something that we've talked about is that you could have a short squeeze where things get out of control to the upside. So bringing that all back, in some ways, maybe that matches what we're seeing here, but curious, any thoughts you've had as you've been watching this over the past couple months?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about in the past, and they say we don't want to go too much into the same stuff, but I think it's healthy. I mean, this part of it is healthy. This is consolidation at a new, higher prices that people aren't accustomed to. And to see it, battling and fighting and staying in that range, I think is really good and for a long bull run in this sector and ultimately higher prices. So I think, if we can continue to do this even through the summer, continue to excuse me, see consolidation and then hit September and watch it, maybe that's the breakout point on rate cuts and anything else that's going on in the world. I think that's good and healthy as far as that. And then, like you say, and one of those catalysts could be, if you're seeing these large short positions while it's still maintaining a healthy consolidation, then you do get into a squeeze moment potentially. And as it breaks out, it's going to break out and just amplify the breakout because those guys are going to have to cover those contracts in the short positions and then just going to springboard it even higher. So it makes me even more excited about this sector, seeing stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, and wonder if we won't have this coiled environment. Could there be a move lower? Certainly that's possible, but could there also be a move higher based on where we're at that could change the dynamics of certain things? That's possible. And as I mentioned, we have some news that certainly could affect that, because this morning we found out that India slashing the import taxes on gold and silver to tackle smuggling. I'm not sure. sometimes when we go behind the reasons of what these moves are really behind. Yet in either case, basically bringing the import duties from 15% down to 6%. Obviously, India is a country with a long history of buying gold and silver. And if we take a look at the inflows, we got the recent data from Metals Focus. You see, there was February, the big spike that was, I believe, a monthly record, around 70 million ounces. The blue bar is showing that has dropped off substantially since then, but we have this news. We have also seen that India is on the list of countries that is planning, at least forecasting, to significantly increase their solar demand. So, but that seems like a big one to me, especially India, who has been importing larger amounts of gold this year, and now we see the customs fee drop on that one.
No, it's very good, and I mean, and oftentimes we see that with India, like this the seasonality of when they do their large imports and what comes in because of different various holidays and when it really kicks off. But yeah, it's another good sign. I mean, this is like it always gets me excited. The more you see people wanting to import and add to their holdings, it's just going to put more and more pressure on that supply chain. And where's the silver going to come from? And there isn't a lot of above ground silver, so the more these guys continue to import it, whether it's going to India, whether it's going to China, on the manufacturing side, like you say, with any increased solar demand, the new generation of solar panels is using twice the amount of silver as the old ones. And it's really drawing on that supply of silver and putting pressure on the various producers of the solar panels to try and acquire and get a supply line on their silver moving forward. And, they've done the long contract thing and taking delivery of physical from their long contracts, and that's what really absorbed that above ground supply. But now they're going to producers. You're hearing of Asian, some of those guys going to directly to the mining companies and offering them $3 above spot just to promise to directly deliver to them. And they're struggling because they can see the writing on the wall that there's not a lot of silver out there, and if they don't secure their supply from what is being produced and what is above ground, then they're potentially going to get to a point where they're not going to be able to manufacture the way they want to because they're not going to have any raw materials.
And certainly at a time where, at least according to the plans, it seems like they'll be needing a lot more of those raw materials. Here was one. This was about a month or two ago, but I have this up here because you have demand for metals and minerals for energy transition need to increase nearly 500% by 2050, which on one hand would be great. And I suppose we've seen small signs that news about a month or so ago where we saw that the US Defense Department was investing in Canadian minerals, but certainly don't see an environment that is going to foster that. At the same time, as you mentioned, I've heard reports of China going to Peru to secure minerals, here Saudi Arabia to visit Brazil and Chile as they seek to diversify mining. So seems like it's happening a lot more in the East. Obviously, we've heard for years of China buying mines and areas where they have natural resources. So does leave a bit of a gap because, as you and I have talked about plenty, we've seen a bull market in the metals. We've seen some money come back in, mostly in the producers of the majors on the mining side, yet still not. We're not in an environment where all of a sudden we're turning it around in the West and about to meet some of these mandates at the current pricing.
No, I mean the West is missing out. I mean the West is lagging and losing this battle with the East, and you've seen this for years with China going into countries where they can operate and act the way they want to produce, use their own, workforce, create their own rules, where the West gets in its own way. We talk, most of the communities we deal with, in our case, I mean, any community we've dealt with any of our projects around the world, there's overwhelming support for mining. So when you see an article like that that says, there's often, conflicts with the local community, like that has never been my experience. The local communities in Mexico, in Sweden, in Canada have always welcomed with open arms. And it's the normally the politicians that get in the way and create conflict, or you get the voice of one, the very few that think mining is evil and don't go into things with an open mind and just decide that you're gonna, just destroy their community, destroy everything. And that's couldn't be farther from the truth with my experience. And we're not the mining companies, but just from an outsider looking in and watching how the mining companies operate and talking with the CEOs of those companies that, we deal with a lot. And it's not like it's portrayed in the movies. And that's the problem is that most of your regular, population that has no clue on how mining works thinks, the mining companies are all evil. They're going to destroy water supplies. They're going to create disasters. They're out there to, screw over the local communities and take, from them and not give back. And my experience is, what I've always seen in our industry for the most part, I mean, there are exceptions and there are areas where, yeah, there are people that aren't as good, but, with the regulations that we have in the West, I mean, what we have to do, which we would do anyways, but what we have to do by law and that now with any sort of local communities and giving back and what comes back to like the life of the people in those local communities increases tenfold, if not more. Their earnings, the quality of life, what's done, the increases and improvements in schools and sports facilities and everything else that comes into a lot of these communities. And it's night and day different. And they're begging you to come in and operate and open a mine in their area. So I don't really, I mean, it's this ongoing thing that's probably one of the biggest detriments to our industry is we're portrayed as, evil, yet you want to have a green movement. And the green movement that we're pushing requires, 3 times the amount of earth to be mined as if, we were doing, uranium and nuclear. So you need mining, and that's the disconnect is we want to be green, but we don't want to mine, and that's impossible. So at some point you've got to trust, and you'd much rather do it with the West doing it because we operate at a lot higher standard of these mines than if you're bringing in, the Eastern, if you're bringing in Chinese mining companies and the standards that they're going to operate at and how they're going to treat the environment and the earth is. Our governments need to wake up and our populations need to wake up and say, well, yes, let's mine and let's have agreement, but let's have the Western companies or, companies do it in our country because it's going to be a heck of a lot better for the environment in the grand scheme of things than what those companies from the East are going to do.
Yeah, and along those lines, Steve, now that we're getting a little closer to Claudia Scheinbaum taking over and the transition there, anything additional that you've heard in terms of where she might be headed and some of the Mexican policies?
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty quiet. There's a lot of challenges that are going on in court from the big mining companies and even people within our own party, like in the state of Sonora, the governor's challenging everything, talking about no open pit permits being issued. And so far, almost everything that I've heard of in court, every time there's been a decision made, they've sided with the mining company saying what's being done by that government party is not right. It's against various international law, different things. So it's an ongoing battle, but and I haven't heard any changes of stance on her part. I mean, she's obviously what's been said has been conflicting because she's wants critical minerals to be mined, but she doesn't want open pitting, and their critical minerals that she wants mined need to be open pitted. So there's going to be somewhere in there. There's going to be a change of philosophy, but no, I mean, I think Mexico's coming around, and the court system there seems to very much be siding with the Mexican or with the mining companies throughout the process so far. And I believe will continue to do so because we've been, everyone's been acting within various trade agreements and different, stances here between Mexico, Canada, the US. And we'll see. I mean, it's a long process and nothing happens overly fast down there, but we continue to get exploration permits. There have been underground mining permits issued. It's right now, and I mean, from our perspective and the state of Sonora's perspective, the battle is on that open pit and no new permits being issued there because it's the number one industry in that state. And you've got mines that are losing their reserves and resources, and you're going to start to lose a lot of tax revenue and money that state generates by not having new open pit mines opening up. And this is an area where most of those open pit mines are in a desert, nowhere near communities, or it's a small community nearby. So when you start talking about environmental issues, that's what makes the state of Sonora great, is you're not in an area where you're in a, biodiversity where you're going to somehow affect that. It's highly optimal. It's a desolate, hot desert in a lot of places, and again, the mining methods now and what's done are very safe and not going to cause an issue even if you were in something that was, but that's not the case either way in Sonora. So it's people, you can't just put like these blanket regulations. I agree. Like if you're down in southern Mexico and you're in the jungle, like let's not open pit that. Like that makes sense. Like let's not strip jungle and wipe out areas that are or wipe out areas, but open up areas that are don't need to be opened up where you could go more select underground on targets. But in a case like the state of Sonora or Durango or other parts of Mexico where you're not in these, that type of environment, you're a much warmer, desolate, open area with very limited communities around, but the communities that are around want to work at the mine and have those jobs for their kids as opposed to working for a cartel. So I don't know. It's something that needs to change. There's a lot of political pressure on them for international and in-house in Mexico from state authorities and city authorities that very much don't agree with the stance that this government regime has taken. And I think it will change. You just got to give it time.
All right. Well, appreciate that because obviously, with Mexico being largest silver producer and a whole host of other minerals as well, obviously going to be important to see how things come together there. Now, Steve, in the positive side, well, I'll give you two pieces of positive news. If you have, I'll send it to you later, but on Tuesday, we have a call going up with Michael Oliver, who's a technical analyst, who's really smart guy, very well respected in the metals. He feels pretty confident, felt pretty confident. He sees a lot of similarities in the things that he looks at between 1980 and 2011. So certainly from the technical side, some again, we'll see how things go. But he's predicting quite a move between now and the election. So over the next couple of months, we'll see how that goes. But nice to hear some of the technical analysts are seeing this environment favorably. So that is piece of good news number one. Here's a second one that at least we see in July. This is the ETFs, does include the COMEX as well. But these blue bars here basically is when we have investment going into these funds. So you can see a nice little uptick here. Similar on the gold side, where we see investors starting to come in. And as you've been talking about, we haven't really seen a lot of participation from the West yet, certainly not in the equities, but hopefully a sign that we may be seeing things turn a corner. And curious, Jess, if that matches anything in the that you've seen in the conversations you've been having, and whether you have any comment on the metals or the equities. But again, as we've discussed, there were a couple months ago, we start to see it turn up a little bit. Then not so much the case in the last month or two. But anything you could add to that?
Yeah, I mean that's how we always talk about it, but this is how it starts. You start seeing it into the ETFs, you start seeing small inflows and money coming into the funds. You start to look at the market and you see the producers and a lot of their share prices have rebounded, at a much healthier level than the smaller junior equities. And that's the trickle. Every cycle, that's the trickle down effect. And so when you want to see a long period of sustain and we want to see inflows, here over months and months and months. And then you start to really build a market. And then those funds are really the ones that we rely on as a junior to finance our companies. They're the ones who have the technical expertise. The generalist funds, when they come back into the space, put their money into the mining specific funds to make those bets on their behalf because they understand that those are the ones who understand the mining and trust them, for their aspect to manage that money better than they could in various mining companies. So it's exciting, it's interesting, and it's a good sign for our sector that that's starting again because you see the spike up earlier in the year and then straight off and fall off, and we know that spike up. A bunch of mining companies, ourselves included, quickly did some placements while the funds got some money, but it needs to be sustained. When it falls off the way it did there after April, then all the companies are looking around again and saying, well, where's the capital going to come from? And this is the way the junior market works. We constantly need capital. It's not that we don't create it on our own. That's not the model. That's not how the sector works. The mining companies produce capital and make money, but the junior explorers, it's constantly asking for capital to then ultimately, to finance drilling, and the win for our investors is when we sell to one of those mining companies, and along the way as the share prices move up on success. So we need sustained long-term inflows. And I mean, you look at that chart and you can see why our sector struggled, from before 2022 down. It's just That's not a good trend, and that hurts. That's a long downtrend in our industry to go over 2 years of no inflows. And certainly, money. That's why the share prices are where they're at. Is we had a historically long period of time with not a lot of joy in the funds having no money to invest even in the projects they like. So to get a window like we did earlier this year was good. It brought, a lot of companies out from, and a lot didn't make it. A lot did delist and lost their listings and didn't survive the last 2 years. So hopefully we get into a longer period of inflows and you're going to see people make a ton of money in this space because there's a lot of quality assets out there that are trading at just crazy valuations relative to the ounces they have in resources and the jurisdictions and everything that they're in. So again, I mean, people are going to do really well, and it's just been a patience game, and we can be a little patient a little longer through summer if we have to be. But I think the fall is shaping up to look really good.
And Steve, do you think we'll see more M&A, some of the larger companies looking for additional projects that they can add at the current market dynamics? Doesn't Haven't really had that too much yet. Is that something you're expecting?
Yeah, it's always a weird balance because like the biggest companies, the big mining companies, small M&A stopped appealing to a lot of them. It doesn't really move the needle for their investors. So when you talk to, the Pan American Silvers, the Agnico Eagles of the world, the Barricks, the Newmonts, they're looking for, if it is a single asset company, it's got to be, a massive tier one asset, you have 5+ million ounce gold asset in a good jurisdiction with great grade and everything else going for it. So where we really need to see, I think we need to see the M&A and we should start seeing it, but they haven't seen that investment yet, haven't benefited yet. You need to see one, you need to see mergers amongst the juniors. You need to see consolidation because a lot of companies are single asset explorers that a more attractive package of 3 or 4 high quality assets together, split across maybe multiple jurisdictions or owning and dominating a district in a jurisdiction becomes more appealing to those funds as they get capital. And instead of going, 4 companies coming to them, if they can invest in one and have access to all 4 assets, that becomes more attractive. And the other side of it is those junior producers, if they don't want to get bought out by a senior and are trying to struggle, they need to increase their production profile and move themselves up to a mid-tier producer, and then from a mid-tier hopefully to a senior producer if they can do the right acquisitions. And those are the guys that haven't had as much capital yet as the senior producers, but as they get it, they need to start redeploying that. And like you say, they need to acquire or they're going to be acquired. And a lot of them, those CEOs in those positions don't like to be acquired. They like this financial model where they're making money in their minds and have aspirations of growing. So we'll see. But those are the guys that definitely you have not seen the M&A from that should start coming after junior explorers, junior developers that are, might have started or are at a stage where they could start building but don't have the capital to do so. And those are the guys that need to get active and start driving that M&A cycle from, a true acquiring standpoint. But I do think the juniors explorers, if we were smart, would start to pick the various high quality exploration assets and to merge together to create a much stronger exploration vehicle that would be very appealing to the various funds out there.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you said earlier, just seeing the consolidation around that $30 level. I know people want to see it continue to go up. I get that. Yet to the degree for people who are actually planning businesses around pricing and making assumptions on where things are at, I would say that that could perhaps be some of the best marketing for that process that you could get. But I have more, Steve. So
Perfect.
just a few data points of things that are going on out there. Here's Judy Shelton, who can former Trump economic advisor. It's unclear if she would be in the cabinet if he does win the upcoming election. And Steve, I don't know if you want to share any political thoughts on the wild past 10 days that we've had. I'll give you your chance for that if you'd like to dig in there. But anyway, Judy Shelton had tweeted about gold. Keith Weiner responded, and she says, even better, a gold linked dollar and a rules based approach to monetary policy. She has talked about gold linked bonds. So just in the degree of sometimes there's value somewhere or something that makes sense, yet the message doesn't get out there. Yet here we see someone who I would say, is a public figure. Here's another public figure. Elon Musk seems, and it's kind of ironic, perhaps Elon Musk controls, I don't want to say controls a large amount of finance, but certainly is influential in the things he says. He's been talking a lot here. America's going bankrupt. Interest payments on the debt are eating 76% of income tax collected. Here, he's talking about dollar value destruction. It even looks like a little ounce of silver up there too. So, and then we did mention this on the show the other day, but Steve, I want to make sure you're aware that the new VP candidate for Donald Trump, JD Vance, has said devaluing, of course, is a scary word, but what it really means is that American exports can become cheaper. So we're starting to get some clues of where this could be headed. And I get it. I had someone ask me or posted on Twitter. It wasn't directly to me, but saying, "Hey, with all these things that are going on politically, how come we don't see the price moving?" I don't know that it quite works like that, but when you see some of these things that are happening over time and are getting rolled out, and then at the end of the day, actually came across this one, which let me pull up here. This was from a Mario Ineco video that came out earlier today, and he had clip of Alan Greenspan because you can follow the day-to-day movements. Silver goes up, silver goes down. You have this event happen, yet at the end of it, underlying everything, I think this sums it up. And then maybe we'll start wrapping up after you get your comment on this one. But let's take a listen here.
Are U.S. Treasury bonds still safe to invest in?
Very much so. I think this is not an issue of credit rating. The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability.
Can we rewind a second and look at the look on that other guy's face where
very much so.
What did he just say?
This is not an issue of credit rating. The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability.
Looks stunned, like the day he realized Santa Claus wasn't real. Did Greenspan really say that? So
let me process what he just said there. This just blew his mind.
So the man known as the Maestro, I guess that's about as clear as you can put it. So, Steve, any thoughts on that or anything else in American politics that we're seeing now, which is getting increasingly wild?
Yeah, I mean it's great. Yeah, print money until you can't get people to buy your cheap T-bills and everything else to continue to finance the whole process. And like, Elon says, like, isn't that wild? 76% of all taxes that are collected in the US are going towards just paying off the debt. Like, how do you function as a country? It's, you are, yes, as long as you're the country and you're, the reserve currency of the world, and you can get away with it and you can continue to build and build and build. And but the second that that's gone, or the second that that's even starts to get challenged, it's a sinking ship. And people gold and silver bugs have heard this time and time again, but every currency that's ever existed in the world has gone down to zero. The powers that be in these currencies that were the world powers that were, conquering and dominating the world, at some point have all become more, down to zero. And that day will come for the US. The problem with the US is their timeline of being the power down to zero might be a lot quicker than a lot of those other powers that existed in, throughout the history of, humanity. And it's because, and this is why. It's just this idea, let's print. We can print more money, and that's what will allow us to pay our debts. And that's great. But let's talk to China, let's talk to Russia, let's talk to the BRICS nations and what they're doing. And the second they start trading in another currency, the second that they start challenging and replacing the US as a reserve currency, now the US dollar doesn't become the safe haven that investors flock to when things go wrong in the world, when you have wars, when you have everything else, and money starts pouring into the US dollar over everything else inexplicably because of that. But the reason they do it is because it's seen as the country. It's the top country. It's where everyone thinks is the safest. It's definitely safer than other countries. But as that gets challenged, that goes away. And when that goes away, all of a sudden this massive debt, this mass, that you can't pay. Like, how stupid is it as a country? You can't pay your debt, costs you more and more when you raise interest rates. You're putting pressure on your banks, and yet you keep raising your interest rates because you want to tackle, you want to tackle inflation the way they said they were going to tackle inflation. And all they did was expedite the process because they're making their debts cost more and more. So they need to rapid fire, first of all, decrease interest rates to make it so servicing that debt is a lot cheaper. And that's going to come, and it's going to come quickly starting in September as we
I was
move
going to
forward.
say you're getting your wish on that one.
It's gonna because they can't afford to pay this debt, and you can't. It makes it more unaffordable the higher your interest rates are. So, I mean, again, you're going into an election, you're going into a lot of things. There's a lot that's gone on, like you say, over the last 10, 11 days. I actually made this comment yesterday, and the person looked at me like I was crazy. But I said, like, I'm surprised, and maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but I'm surprised at how little attention there was given the historic level of an assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. And they said, "What are you talking about? It's been all in the media." I was like, think of all the other things that have happened here, while Trump was in other elections, and at nauseum how much things were covered. And yes, the media covered it, but you would have had TV shows canceled for weeks. You would have had everything else, and this is all that would have been talked about. And it was not talked about that much. And it was, the victims, that were shot and killed. There wasn't a lot done on them, and it was, again, we know that the media is far more skewed towards the left in the Democratic Party in the U.S. But the second that Trump raised his hand, I wasn't the only one. I've talked a lot of people that said that he did. He's like, he just won. He just became president. Like, the guy's bleeding from his ear. He's got his fist raised. You know, Absolutely, they just tried to kill this guy, and here he is with his fist up in the air and powerful. And then you had, and obviously yesterday changed things with Biden. Without even coming out and no one seeing the guy step down and isn't running for president anymore. But I said, this is your position of power. The president of the United States is supposed to be a person that you look to as a powerful figure, and here's this guy bleeding from his ear with his fist raised, like, you can't kill me. Like, I don't know. It's And I'm not going to say I'm the largest Trump supporter or anything along that line of thinking. I think the right is better for the US and moving forward into where we're at politically. And I think it's sad that the US, that's the best two candidates, or three if we want to include Kamala Harris, if she's the replacement for sure. I mean, smart people don't go into politics, and they don't want to have drag their family through the mud and everything else. And it's sad that, given a country with as many people that live there as the US, that over the last number of elections, that these are the best people that you can have to run your country. But anyways, that's beside the fact. Is I think in the grand scheme of things here, I'm excited to hopefully have the Republicans win that election. I think that will be far more positive as well for gold and silver. And I just think it's, in the grand, over the next little bit, having right-wing politics in the US and the decisions they make financially for the people and quality of lives and everything else, and taxing decisions and how they're going to go about it, I think is better for the country. But we'll see how it all plays out. But I do think right wing will be far better for gold and silver than having another Democratic 4 years.
Yeah, and it certainly does seem like it's headed that way. And I share your sentiments on the Trump thing. Obviously, on A, a tragedy, but B, a lot of unanswered questions that Kim Cheadle didn't really clear up in her Monday congressional appearance. And then, yeah, the other thing that came out on Monday night regarding Biden, there was a press release suggesting that he's ceding power to Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury. So is Janet going to be making the decisions? Wild times out there. And personally, I wonder whether it's JD Vance and Trump or anyone else, if we're not heading towards some sort of dollar devaluation. Steve here. Well, the September rate cut odds down to 96%. But anyway, just to put some numbers on there. One last thing here. I might add that this is an old clip, and they're talking about the U.S. debt getting downgraded. I'm guessing most likely this was back in 2011 when silver was soaring up to $50. The downgrade was a couple months after that, but basically the debt gets downgraded, and the solution is to bring Alan Greenspan to say that we can print everything. So anyway, there you go on that. Although, Steve, before we wrap up, obviously you guys had some news out yesterday, and wanted to say congratulations as you have made your final payment on the La Virginia project and now are the 100% owner. So anything you could share there and tell folks about how things are coming along?
I mean, it's a big milestone for any company, but yeah, and I have to thank the landowners and the claims owners that we did our agreement with, and a number of times we restructured that based on the different complications in the market and things that were happening, and our partners have been great working with us. But to finally get to where we're issuing that final shares and cash payment to acquire the project outright 100%. Is a milestone. It makes us, in my opinion, and from when I've talked to the various mining companies and that, the junior owning it 100% outright and not having any split ownership or potentially different groups to deal with is a big deal. So for us, owning that 100% is huge. It eliminates future payments or anything that we have on that front. So again, it'll be our balance sheet, and our spending comes down based on that, not having any additional payments year by year. And now we can get to work and find a partner or find someone to acquire the project ultimately down the road, and and make our shareholders some money. And so hopefully, that's always been a question. I know it was an overhang at times when we had, prior to being able to restructure deals, is some of the funds were approached and say, how are you going to make that payment? This market's tough. How are you going to be able to make that property payment? And, the risk in their mind of potentially not making the payment and losing the asset was there. And, so to work through all that, even given the tough market over the last few years, to be able to raise capital and to be able to make sure that we are acquiring our asset 100%, which is done now, is great. And again, I got to thank our partners in Mexico for working with us throughout the whole process. And I think it's a big first step moving forward as we get into a better gold and silver market here, and ultimately, get back to drilling and updating the resource and showing where this asset is at. But even with where our resource is right now on that project, which, with the drilling we've done, the resource would be higher. But, I look back at, history and even before this bump up in gold and silver, what companies were typically paying per ounce. And Agnico Eagle for a long time had a slide that covered the last, 6-7 years of acquisitions they made. And they were advertising an acquisition price of 120, I believe it was $125 per ounce US in the ground of what they were paying for ounces of gold. And so, in our case, we have, 700,000 gold equivalent ounces. And if you're paying, 100 and some US per ounce, you're getting up close to, $100 million Canadian. And we're trading at a, Canadian market cap right now of around, 15 to 18 million. And that's gold when gold was trading at 1,300, 1,200, 1,400, 1,500, and margins were very thin. If you go back further into history, and talking with my father, who's been around the industry for a very long time, there was a time where it was a third of the gold price was what was paid on an acquisition. The acquiring company got a third. It was a third, a third, a third was always the rule in our sector. So as we have prices move up, you're going to see that price in the ground, and it probably already should be a lot higher than 100 and some US per ounce in the ground with 2,400 gold in a good jurisdiction in a mine that makes sense and was economic back at $1,200. So again, I think it starts to really show how undervalued our company is just on the ounces in the ground, never mind what we've already added with the drill rig that would be in an updated resource, and starting to factor in how many ounces we would have additionally with an independent using 20, well, they wouldn't use 2,400, but let's say they use 2,200 or 2,100 versus the 14 or 1,500 that our last resource was done at per ounce. And that will add a ton of ounces. It'll bring the grade down, but it's because it's economic, and it's going to be economic to mine a lot more of that lower grade material. But I'm excited, and I think it starts to speak to where we're positioned, and we're not the only one, but it's definitely my opinion, how undervalued, and you'll hear lots of people say it, but we're that undervalued, and that's using an old standard of what you pay in the ground. Moving forward, that number is going to move up, and it's going to move up dramatically. So that's the opportunity for investors, and it's up to them to take advantage. And I think the funds are chomping at the bit to do it. And as we covered, seeing inflows into the funds, you're going to see capital pour back into the space. And when capital starts pouring back into the space, these share prices will recover and jump very, very quickly on the junior side. So again, I hope investors see the value in that, and we see money start to come back into a company like ours. And, for all those shareholders who support us, I thank you. And moving forward, I think we're going to see much higher share prices and a much stronger market.
Yeah, and Steve, obviously, you mentioned in there getting back out and drilling. We've talked a bit about how that process has been going in the financing environment. I know there's other options you've been looking into, and just if there's anything that you can update since our last talk about how things are coming along there, and also if there would be any other steps contingent after the drilling, would then the updated resource be the next step, or any other key hurdles you would have to cross to get there?
No, yeah, I mean, I think after our next phase of drilling, we'll definitely update the resource. That would definitely be a big step. As far as financing options, there's a bunch of different stuff. We're owed quite a bit of money by the Mexican government. We just hired a new group to come in and start trying to recover that capital, but there's a $2.5 million sum sitting there that we should be able to, get a bunch of that back. And in that itself, as that money starts coming in, that would fund a drill program. We've also talking with a number of different partners that are very interested in getting involved. So there's the potential for a joint venture on the project where we have someone else fund drilling to earn a certain percentage of the property interest, and that could be an avenue moving forward that's where there would be a non-dilutionary way of financing the project for investors to benefit from. I mean, the main thing here is we got to get back to work. We've got to start producing that news flow and increasing the resource, and get it up to, our goal is always to make something as large that is interesting to those major mining companies. And so we want to see, million minimum, but really, you want to push this up to over 2 million ounces of gold to really get, the Agnicos and out of the world going, or the Fresnios, targeting a Mexican mining company that's a very large, one of the largest silver producers in the world, is the largest silver producer in the world. So these are the types of companies that we want to be ultimately selling our project to. And to do that, we've got to get back drilling. We've got to expand on that resource, a bit further. But this project has the potential to get a lot bigger than 2 million ounces, with whether it's our deeper target that we talk about and we've talked about in the past, or finding additional stuff at surface that are other El Rubies on the project. It's a target rich environment, lots that have never been drilled before. It's a massive land package with this structure that runs for, hundreds of kilometers. It's just vectoring in on those best spots for mineralization to occur and have the largest blowouts and best grades. And again, I think it's one of the best, if not, gold silver assets out there right now. And it's just where we're at in this market. That's unfortunate, but there are things definitely behind the scenes that are happening that are going to bring us back to drilling and being prominent again. And I'm excited for those things to come to fruition here, hopefully very soon.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Obviously, we've talked a lot about financing over the past couple months or year, and understandably so. And just thinking at the same time, when all of those things fall in place, it'll certainly be fun to get back to talking about the drilling and seeing, I guess in some sense, you've had a lot of time to plan and be ready for when you are able to get out there. So in either case, I appreciate that update. And I think it'll be exciting. I'm personally excited to see once can start getting back to executing the plan, have the financing in place, and especially given the environment that, again, can you ever know for sure 6 months from now whether gold or silver will be higher or lower? But
No.
hopefully will be a nice confluence of events coming together at the same time. And Steve, just in wrapping up, could you let folks know once again how they can reach you if they do have questions or would like to get some more detail on anything that you mentioned there?
Yeah, like you say, all the information's on the website here, www.silverviperminerals.com. You can reach out. We've got contact details for Alicia or myself through the phone number that's on that contact link on the page there. Email at info@silverviperminerals.com comes to Alicia and myself as well, and more than happy to answer any questions people have or set up video calls. I know we've talked to a couple of investors that follow Chris closely recently, and Chris has set up some meetings. So again, we're more than happy to jump on and talk with various investors. And again, thanks everyone for their support and following the company, and Chris to constantly doing these videos and letting people update and talking about the market. It's always fun. So I appreciate the time and hope everyone's enjoying their summer.
Well, Steve, I appreciate that, and plenty out there happening to keep us busy. So thanks again for making some time. Great to see you as always. And who knows what will happen by next month, but I'll look forward to catching up with you again then.